It was raining that morning. A soft, endless kind of rain that made the world look like it was wrapped in glass. The sea outside my window was calm, humming its low, constant song, the same song I'd grown up with. I used to think the sea never stopped singing. That day I learned it could. I buttoned my white suit with trembling hands. The mirror showed a stranger. Pale skin, nervous eyes, lips pressed into a shaky smile. My heart was racing, not from fear, but from something like disbelief. I was getting married today, to the man I'd loved since I was 17, to Ryu Jae-hyuk. He'd promised to come early. He said he wanted to see me before the ceremony started, even though everyone said it was bad luck. But Jae-hyuk never cared about superstition. He said, "If we can survive life, we can survive a little bad luck." Outside, the wedding guests began arriving at the seaside chapel, a small, white building that faced the waves. I could hear laughter, the sound of umbrellas opening and closing, the echo of camera shutters. Everything was perfect. Everything except the empty road that led down from the hill, the one Jae-hyuk was supposed to drive down. At first, I thought he was just running late. He had a habit of getting lost in his own world, taking detours to pick wildflowers or stop for coffee. So I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 30. When my phone rang, I smiled automatically. But it wasn't his name on the screen. It was his friend, Min-jun. His voice was shaking. "Hae-won. There's been an accident." The world didn't stop then, it folded. The walls around me tilted. The air thickened. The rain outside suddenly sounded too loud. I didn't even remember how I got to the cliff road. I just remember the flashing lights, the smell of burning rubber, and the sea, vast and endless, swallowing pieces of metal and white flowers. Someone held me back when I tried to run toward the edge. They said the car went off the cliff, straight into the water. That the tide was too strong, the current too deep. That no body had been found yet. But all I could see was his ring, the one I'd chosen for him, lying half buried in wet sand. The tide kept pulling at it, as if trying to take even that away. I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking as I touched the cold metal. Felt like touching a ghost. They told me later that it was an accident, that maybe the brakes failed, or the rain made him lose control. They told me to rest, to eat, to pray. But I didn't, because something inside me broke that day, something I didn't know how to fix. When I went back home, the house felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean, too empty. His shoes were still by the door. His mug was still on the counter, half stained with coffee. And every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw headlights disappearing into the rain. The sea outside my window stopped singing. It was just silent. And I realized something I'd never wanted to know. That silence can be louder than any scream. People came and went. They offered comfort, pity, advice. But after the funeral, after the flowers wilted and the guests stopped coming, it was just me. Me and the sea, both too tired to make any sound. Days turned into weeks and weeks blurred into months. The calendar changed, but nothing else did. I stopped answering messages. Stopped writing. I kept his photo on the nightstand, as if it could anchor me to something real. Sometimes, I would stand by the water, staring at the horizon until my eyes burned. I used to imagine that if I waited long enough, the sea would give him back. That maybe one morning, I'd wake up to find him at the door, smiling, dripping rain on the floor, saying, "Did you think I'd leave you alone that easily?" But the door never opened. The only sound was the wind, moving through an empty house that still smelled faintly like him. A year passed, and I learned to live with the silence, or maybe I just forgot how to fight it. I cooked meals for one person. Sometimes, without realizing, I'd make enough for two. The second plate always went cold. I told myself I was healing, that grief was a tide. It came and went. But that was a lie. Grief wasn't a tide. It was the sea itself. And I was drowning in it. That night, the night everything changed, was quiet like every other. The same hum of waves, the same sigh of wind through half-open windows. I was writing another letter to him, letters he'd never read, letters that filled a wooden box under my bed. "If you were still here," I wrote, I tell you, the sea has forgotten your song. Just as I put down the pen, a sound broke the silence. A sound I hadn't heard in a year. The doorbell. I froze. The pen slipped from my hand and rolled across the desk. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. No one visited me anymore. It rang again. One soft chime, hesitant, almost shy. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Outside, the rain had started again. Through the window, I could see a blurred silhouette, tall, still, waiting. My breath caught. Something inside me, something I thought had died, stirred painfully awake. I opened the door, and there he was, Ryu Jae-hyuk, soaked to the bone, eyes empty yet familiar. Alive. The world tilted again. Not with loss this time, but with disbelief. My throat burned. Couldn't move, couldn't speak. He just stood there, breathing hard, looking at me like he was searching for something he couldn't name. Then, in a low, unsteady voice, he said, I think I used to live here. And the sea outside my window began to sing again. For a long time, I just stood there. The rain behind him blurred the world into silver. His face, half lit by the porch light, looked both familiar and wrong, like a memory wearing someone else's skin. Jae-hyuk. The name slipped out before I could stop it. He didn't react. He blinked slowly, as if testing the sound. I think you have the wrong house, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his eyes scanning my face, my doorway, the faint glow from inside. Then he shook his head. No, I remember this place. The words landed like a wave. My heart stuttered. Every instinct screamed to run to him, to hold him. But fear kept me rooted. He was supposed to be dead. I'd watched his coffin lowered into the earth. I'd heard the priest say his name. So what was standing in front of me now? I took a step back. Who are you? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. His hands were trembling. Not from cold, but from something deeper, something lost. I don't know, he said finally. But when I saw this house, my heart started hurting. I thought, maybe I belong here. The rain had started coming down harder. His hair stuck to his forehead. His clothes clung to his body. Instinct took over before logic could argue. I reached out and pulled him inside. The door closed with a hollow click, shutting the storm out. But the silence inside was even heavier. I turned away quickly, afraid to meet his eyes for too long. Sit there, I muttered, gesturing to the couch. He obeyed like someone used to following orders, quietly, carefully. I fetched a towel, my hands shaking so much I nearly dropped it. When I handed it to him, our fingers brushed. His touch was warm, too warm to belong to a ghost. He looked around the room like he was trying to map a dream. His gaze lingered on the framed photos on the wall. Pictures of him and me, smiling at the sea, holding hands. He stared for a long time. That's me? He asked softly. My throat tightened. It was. He didn't ask more, just kept staring, as if the face in the photo was a stranger he was supposed to know. For a while, we didn't speak. The clock ticked in the background. The rain softened. The house felt smaller, like it couldn't hold this kind of silence. I went to the kitchen out of habit, trying to breathe. My body moved on its own, kettle, tea leaves, cups. The smell of jasmine filled the air, the same one he used to love. When I brought the tray to the table, he was already watching me. You're shaking, he said. I laughed, but it sounded hollow. You'd shake too if your dead fiancé showed up at your door. He flinched at the word fiancé. Something flickered in his eyes. Confusion, pain, maybe both. Fiancé, he repeated, like tasting a word he didn't understand. So, you and I nodded slowly. We were going to be married. The day you... My voice broke before I could finish. He didn't ask how he died. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe some part of him already did. We sat across from each other, the tea cooling between us. I couldn't stop staring at his hands. The same shape, the same small scar near his thumb. Everything was him, and yet nothing was. He lifted the cup and took a careful sip. Then, suddenly, his fingers froze midair. A faint tremor ran through him. "This taste," he whispered. "I know it." I looked up sharply. "What did you say?" He pressed his hand against his temple, eyes squeezing shut as if trying to hold onto something slipping away. "I don't know. I've had this before. Someone used to make it for me. It always smelled like." He opened his eyes, and for a fleeting second, I saw the man I'd loved. The same warmth, the same softness. "Like home," he finished. The cup slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor. He stared at it blankly, breathing hard. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I didn't mean." "It's fine," I whispered, because I'd already broken far more than a cup this past year. I knelt down to pick up the shards, my fingers brushing against spilled tea, warm, fragrant, painfully familiar. When I looked up, he was still watching me with that lost expression, like a man standing in the ruins of his own life. "You can stay here tonight," I said quietly. "There's a spare room." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'm not," I admitted. "But I don't want to watch you walk back into the rain." Something flickered in his eyes again. Something soft, almost grateful. He nodded. I showed him the room, small, barely used, but clean. When he stepped inside, he turned once more to look at me. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know who I am right now, but something about this place makes me feel like I used to be someone." I stood there after he closed the door, my heart pounding like it had just learned to move again. In the quiet, I could hear the sound of the sea outside, soft, hesitant, as if it was learning how to sing again too. I leaned against the wall and let out a shaky breath. Was this a dream? A cruel one, maybe, or a miracle dressed in confusion? But whatever it was, one thing was certain. He was alive. And that night, for the first time in a year, the house didn't feel empty anymore. When I woke the next morning, the house was still. For a second I thought I dreamed everything. The doorbell, the rain, the man with Jae-hyuk's eyes. But the extra pair of shoes by the door said otherwise. He was real. I moved through the kitchen as quietly as possible. The kettle hissed, the clock ticked. From the hallway I heard footsteps, light, cautious. He stopped at the entrance, his hair still damp from a shower. He was wearing one of my old sweaters, one I used to tease him about for stealing. It hung the same way on his shoulders. "Morning," he said softly, as if testing the word. I nodded. "Morning." He looked at the window, where the ocean glimmered beyond the glass. "Is it always this quiet here?" "Yes," I said. "The sea does all the talking." He smiled faintly, then winced and touched his temple. A shadow crossed his face. Pain or memory trying to surface. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "A little," he admitted. "When I try to remember, it feels like running into fog. I can see shapes, but the closer I get, the more they disappear." I poured tea for both of us. He watched the steam curl upward, eyes thoughtful. "I keep seeing waves," he murmured. "And hands. Someone's hands." My fingers tightened around the cup. "Mine." He looked at me for a long time, as if comparing the image in his mind to the person in front of him. Then he nodded, almost shyly. "Maybe." The words settled between us like dust, soft, but impossible to ignore. We ate breakfast in silence. The sound of spoons against bowls filled the space where a year of words should have been. Every time he looked up, I caught myself staring too long. Part of me wanted to demand answers. Where had he been? Why hadn't he come back sooner? But the other part was afraid that asking would break whatever fragile thing had brought him here. After we finished, he offered to wash the dishes. "You used to hate dishes," I said before I could stop myself. He paused, a plate in his hand. "I did. You always said soap dried your hands." He turned the water off, studying his palms as if trying to see the proof there. Then, to my surprise, he laughed quietly. "I guess some habits take a while to return." The sound made my chest ache. It was the same laugh, lower, steadier, but it carried a distance now, like an echo from another lifetime. That afternoon the rain stopped. Sunlight slipped through the windows for the first time in days. He wandered through the house, touching things like they were fragile pieces of another person's story. Books, shells, photographs. When he reached the piano, his fingers hovered above the keys. "Do you play?" he asked. "You did," I said. "You said the sea taught you." He smiled at that, half believing, half wondering. Then he pressed a single key. The note lingered in the quiet room, trembling and pure. Something inside me cracked. I turned away before he could see my eyes. I busied myself with folding laundry, sweeping sand near the door. Anything that didn't require facing him. Later, when the sky turned gold, he appeared in the doorway again. "I can help with dinner," he said. "You don't have to." "I want to," he replied simply. "It feels right." We moved around each other in the small kitchen, awkward but gentle. At one point, his hand brushed mine as he passed a bowl. We both froze. For a heartbeat, time bent back to the night before the wedding, the warmth, the laughter, the ring he never got to wear. He pulled his hand away first. "Sorry." "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't. We ate as the sky dimmed. Outside, the sea whispered against the rocks. Afterward, he carried his dishes to the sink without being asked. Then he lingered near the window, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Do you ever go down there?" he asked. "Sometimes." "Would you show me tomorrow?" His tone was careful, almost afraid of my answer. I hesitated. The cliff road still haunted me. I hadn't walked it since the accident. But when I looked at him, alive, uncertain, trying, I nodded. "Tomorrow," I said. He smiled then, small but real. "Good night, Hae-won." Hearing my name from his mouth again felt like a wound reopening and healing all at once. I whispered back, "Good night, Jae-hyuk." When his door closed, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, listening to the faint creak of the sea breeze. He was here, breathing under the same roof. And yet the distance between us felt wider than ever. I touched the ring still hanging from the chain around my neck. It was warm from my skin. Outside, the tide shifted. The waves rose and fell, as if matching the rhythm of a heart that refused to give up. The next morning began with sunlight. Not the harsh kind, but soft and pale, the kind that makes the sea look like glass. For the first time in a long while, I didn't wake up to the sound of waves alone. There was another rhythm, footsteps, a quiet hum from the kitchen. He was already awake. When I walked in, I found him standing by the window, watching the horizon while the kettle boiled. The scene was so familiar it made my breath catch. He used to stand exactly like that, sleeves rolled up, lost in thought. "Morning," I said. He turned, smiling a little. "I hope I didn't wake you." "You didn't. I usually wake up early." He nodded, then frowned thoughtfully at the kettle. "I was going to make tea, but I couldn't find that small tin." "The jasmine one?" His head lifted. "Yes, that one." I hesitated before answering. "It's in the cupboard above the sink." He reached for it, his movements uncertain but graceful, as if his body remembered habits his mind couldn't. When he opened the tin, the faint scent of jasmine drifted through the air, sweet, light, a little sad. He froze. For a moment he didn't breathe. His eyes darkened, like he was listening to something far away. "Are you all right?" I asked quietly. He nodded, but his hand trembled slightly as he set the tin down. "It's strange," he said. "The moment I opened this, I heard someone laughing, just for a second. My heart clenched. Mine?" He didn't answer immediately. Then softly, "I think so." We stood there for a while, the sound of boiling water filling the silence. Then he poured it carefully into the cups, the scent deepening as the steam rose. He handed one to me. Our fingers brushed again. A small, electric touch that felt like time trying to connect itself. "Thank you," I murmured. We sat by the window facing the ocean. The tea tasted the same as it always had. Light, comforting, familiar enough to hurt. "I used to make this for you," I said finally. "Every morning, before you left for work. You said the smell helped you think." He looked at me for a long time, something flickering behind his gaze, recognition or longing. Then he smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I remembered it," he whispered. For a moment, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was fragile, almost peaceful. After breakfast, we went outside. The sky was clear, the wind cool. The sea shimmered like a sheet of light. He walked a few steps ahead, careful on the stones. Every now and then, he'd turn back to make sure I was close. That small, protective gesture. It was so him that my throat tightened. When we reached the cliff, the wind carried the scent of salt and pine. He stopped there, looking down at the water, his expression unreadable. "This is the road, isn't it?" he asked. I nodded. My voice wouldn't come. He knelt, tracing the edge of the ground where wild grass grew between the rocks. "I thought so. My chest hurts here," he murmured. "It's like my heart knows this place, but it's scared to remember why." The sea roared below us, soft and endless. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I was back there, sirens, shattered glass, a ring slipping from my hand into the waves. "I didn't come here for a year," I admitted. "I couldn't. It felt like the sea had taken you away for good." He turned to me slowly. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For leaving you alone. Even if I didn't mean to." His words were quiet, but they cracked something deep inside me. I shook my head. "You didn't leave. You died." He flinched. The wind caught his hair, the sunlight softening the shock in his eyes. But he didn't argue. After a long silence, he whispered, "Can I tell you something strange?" I nodded. "Ever since I woke up, I've been dreaming of this place. Not the accident, just the sound of waves and someone saying my name. Sometimes I wake up with tears in my eyes, and I don't even know why." I looked at him, my chest tightening around the words I hadn't said for months. "Because someone never stopped calling it," I whispered. His gaze met mine, and for the first time, there was warmth in it. Fragile, uncertain, but real. The wind carried the scent of jasmine from the tea we'd shared, mixing with the salt in the air. For a moment, I thought the sea began to hum again, like it was remembering its own song. That evening, back at the house, he stood by the piano again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He played a few notes, uneven, quiet, searching. Then, slowly, the melody began to form. I recognized it immediately. The song he used to hum whenever he cooked. The one he said he'd write fully after our wedding. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying not to make a sound. He looked up at me then, eyes soft, almost startled. "Did I play this before?" "Yes," I whispered. "You wrote it for me." He didn't answer, just smiled faintly and kept playing. The music was imperfect, scattered but alive, like him. And as the last note faded, I realized something quietly terrifying. I was starting to believe again. The sea had been quiet for days, but that night it started to whisper again. It began with the wind pushing through the open window. A low hum, the rhythm of water against stone. Couldn't sleep. The sound felt too alive, like it was carrying voices I wasn't ready to hear. From the next room, I heard him stirring. First, I thought it was just the floor creaking. Then I heard it. A faint, broken murmur. "Hae-won." I froze. The sound of my own name, spoken the way he used to, soft, careful, with the smallest tremor of warmth. I got up and stood outside his door. The moonlight spilled across the hallway, pale and cold. He was asleep, but his face was tense, his hands clutching the blanket like he was trying to hold on to something. "Jae-hyuk," I whispered. He flinched, his breathing uneven. Then again, "Don't go, please." My heart twisted. I stepped closer, hesitating only for a second before kneeling beside his bed. Sweat lined his forehead. His lashes trembled. He was dreaming of that day. I could feel it. "Hey," I said softly, reaching for his hand. "You're safe. I'm right here." At my touch, his body slowly relaxed. His fingers moved, a weak, uncertain grip, but it was enough to make my throat tighten. He murmured again, barely audible. "Don't leave me." "I won't," I whispered. "Not this time." For a long while, I stayed there, listening to the rhythm of his breathing even out, the sea humming outside like it was keeping watch. When he finally quieted, I pulled my hand away and sat back. The ring around my neck felt heavier than usual. I touched it, the same one he was supposed to wear that day. The sea had taken him once, and now it was giving him back in pieces. The next morning he looked pale. "Did I talk in my sleep?" he asked hesitantly. I hesitated. "A little." He frowned, searching my face. "What did I say?" "Nothing much," I lied. He didn't believe me, but he let it go. Instead, he went to the piano and started playing soft, uncertain notes that drifted through the house like fragile memories. It was the same half-finished melody from the night before, but this time it came with words. He hummed under his breath, quiet at first, then louder until I recognized them. "When the waves call your name, I'll find you again." The song stopped abruptly. He stared down at the keys, breathing hard. "I've sung that before," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I whispered. "You wrote it. For us." He closed his eyes. "For us." Then, after a pause, "I'm starting to remember small things. Not clearly. Just flashes." "What kind of flashes?" He rubbed his temple. "Your voice in the rain. The smell of jasmine. A ring in my hand." I froze. "You remember the ring?" "Only how it felt. Cold, and then warm again." I wanted to cry, but I forced a smile. "That's good. It means you're healing." He looked at me for a long time, long enough for me to see the question behind his eyes. "Do you want me to remember everything?" I blinked. "Of course I do. Even if it hurts?" The words hit deeper than I expected. I turned to the window, the sunlight flickering over the sea. "Pain doesn't scare me," I said quietly. "Forgetting does." He didn't reply, but when I looked back, he was watching me. That same gaze from before, searching, trying to recognize something that never really left. That evening, we walked down to the beach. The sand was cool, the waves gentle. He walked barefoot, his steps uncertain at first, then steady. He stopped where the tide kissed the shore and closed his eyes. "I've stood here before," he murmured. "You have," I said. "You proposed here." He opened his eyes slowly, turning toward me. "Was it raining?" "Yes." He smiled faintly. "Then it makes sense." "Why?" "Because every time it rains, my chest feels like it's trying to remember something." The sound of the waves filled the silence that followed. Then he reached out, almost unconsciously, and brushed the side of my hand. It wasn't a full touch, just enough to make my pulse skip. When I didn't pull away, he let his fingers rest there, warm and trembling. It was the first time in a year I'd felt that warmth, the same quiet steadiness that used to anchor me. "Does this feel wrong?" he asked softly. "No," I said, though my voice shook. "It feels like home." He smiled, that same small, careful smile that once belonged only to me. But behind it, there was confusion. The pain of someone who wants to believe but doesn't trust his own memories yet. The tide rolled higher, touching our feet, cold and alive. "I don't understand how I'm still here," he said. "But maybe I don't need to. Maybe I just need to start living again." I looked at him, this man who had died in my arms once, now standing beside me under the same sky, and I realized I was scared not of losing him, but of believing he was really back. He turned toward the sea again and whispered something too soft for me to hear. I caught only the last word. My name. That night I couldn't sleep again. The house was quiet, but not empty. From the other room, I heard the faint hum of the same melody, the same unfinished song. And for the first time since he came back, I wasn't afraid of dreaming. Because maybe, just maybe, the waves weren't whispering anymore. Maybe they were calling him home. I found it by accident. The photograph. It had slipped behind a stack of old letters in the living room drawer, the one I hadn't opened since the funeral. The edges were bent, the ink a little faded, but the image still burned clear. Me and Jae-hyuk on the beach, his arms around me, both of us laughing at something the wind had stolen. I stared at it for a long time, my thumb tracing the curve of his smile. 1,000 mornings, 1,000 tiny moments, all folded into that one picture. When I turned around, he was standing at the doorway. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to scare you." It's fine. I tried to hide the photo, but he'd already seen it. Is that us? I hesitated. Yes. He stepped closer, eyes locked on the picture like it held something sacred. He reached out slowly, as if afraid it might disappear. I remember this shirt, he said quietly. You bought it for me because I ruined mine in the rain. My breath caught. You remember that? He nodded faintly, but his brows furrowed. Only pieces. It's like my mind is a puzzle with too many missing corners. He looked at the photo again, and then his face changed. The air around us shifted. Wait, he whispered. There was someone else that day. I frowned. What do you mean? He pressed a hand to his temple, his voice breaking. There was a car headlights you. You were calling my name. He gasped and stumbled back, the color draining from his face. I caught him before he fell. Hey, it's okay. You don't have to push it. But he shook his head, breathing hard. No, I need to remember. I need to know why I survived. His words hung in the air like thunder that never reached the ground. Later that night, he sat by the window, the photo in his hand. The house was dark except for the lamp beside him. I made tea, though neither of us drank it. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice quiet like he was talking to the sea outside. There was an accident. I remember now. My hands froze. I was driving to the ceremony. It was raining so hard I could barely see. I remember thinking, don't be late. He'll be waiting. He stopped, the photo trembling between his fingers. Then the brakes failed near the cliff. I tried to turn, but the car went through the guardrail. Everything was water, cold, crushing. I thought, that was it. I could hear the waves outside, echoing the rhythm of his voice. But then, someone pulled me out. A fisherman, I think. I woke up in a hospital 2 days later. My memory was gone. I didn't even know my own name. They told me I'd been found miles down the coast. He looked up at me, eyes glistening. I kept seeing flashes of a face. Yours. I didn't know who you were, but every time it rained, I felt like I was breaking someone's promise. My vision blurred. I didn't realize I was crying until he stood and gently wiped the tears from my cheek. You weren't late, I whispered. You just took the long way home. He smiled weakly, his thumb still brushing my skin. For a year, I thought I was someone else. But now I know. I've always been yours. The words hit harder than any storm. I wanted to say something, anything. But the only sound in the room was the quiet rush of the sea beyond the glass. He set the photograph on the table, then reached for my hand. I'm sorry, he said again. For every moment you thought I'd left. I shook my head. You never left. You were always here. He followed my gaze to the ring around my neck. May I? I nodded. He lifted it gently, the metal glinting faintly in the lamplight. I remember giving you this, he murmured. You said it wasn't just a promise. It was proof that even if the sea took us apart, it would bring us back. He let the ring rest against my chest again, his hand lingering there. Steady, warm, alive. And for the first time since that day, I let myself believe he really was. Alive. The night deepened, but neither of us moved away. Outside, the sea wasn't whispering anymore. It was singing softly, endlessly, like a lullaby it had been holding back for a year. He looked out the window and said, almost to himself, I think I was meant to find my way back through that sound. I smiled through the blur of tears. Then maybe the sea was never cruel after all. He turned to me, his eyes steady now. No confusion, no fog, just quiet truth. No, he said. It was kind. It kept me alive long enough to find you again. That night, I fell asleep for the first time in months without dreaming of loss. Because the man I dreamed of was right there, breathing, remembering, holding on. And somewhere beyond the waves, the sea finally carried his name home. By morning, the sea had changed. The horizon that had been calm for days was now restless. Gray waves rising like old memories refusing to sleep. The wind pressed against the windows with a low moan. The same sound I remembered from the day everything broke. Jae-hyuk stood on the porch, looking at the sky. There's a storm coming, he said. I nodded. They say it'll pass by nightfall. He smiled faintly. Storms never really pass, do they? They just move further out. Inside, the air smelled of salt and jasmine. We'd made tea again, a quiet ritual neither of us spoke about. He traced a finger around the rim of his cup. Do you still blame the sea? He asked. Sometimes, I admitted, but not as much as I used to. Good, he said softly, because I think it was the only thing that never lied to us. By afternoon the wind had turned fierce. Rain hammered the roof in sheets, and thunder rolled like a heartbeat beneath the floor. I tried closing the shutters, but the sound still found its way in. Every crack, every echo felt like the past knocking. Jae-hyuk helped me move the plants from the porch. When the last pot was safe inside, he stopped by the window, watching the rain pound the sea. It looks the same, he said. Exactly like that day. I stood beside him, our reflections blurred in the glass. Yes, I whispered. Exactly. Then quietly, are you afraid? He thought for a moment. Of the storm? No. Of forgetting again? Maybe. He turned toward me, eyes steady despite the flicker of lightning. But I won't. Not this time. Something in his voice made me believe him. We stood there as the wind howled around the house, two silhouettes framed against the light. For the first time since he'd come back, I reached for his hand without hesitation. He didn't flinch. His fingers tightened around mine, grounding me as thunder cracked over the cliffs. Hours passed that way. When the electricity finally went out, we lit a single candle on the table. The flame bent and swayed with the wind seeping through the cracks, casting our shadows across the wall. Two shapes that had once been torn apart, finding their way back into one. I used to imagine this, I said quietly. You and me, waiting out the rain. He smiled. Then let's not waste it. We sat by the candle, the storm outside roaring like a beast, and talked. Not about the past. Not about the accident or pain or what might have been, but about the small things we'd missed. The taste of early morning coffee, the sound of gulls at dawn, the way the light hit the sea in late summer. Every word felt like stitching torn fabric back together. At one point, the candle flickered dangerously low. In the half-darkness, his face looked both familiar and new. The same man, rebuilt by time and water. Hae-won, he said suddenly, voice steady against the wind. I don't know how much fate had to do with any of this. But I do know one thing. When I thought I was gone, the only thing that kept me breathing was the sound of your name. The candlelight wavered, and the words filled every corner of the room. My throat closed. I wanted to answer, but nothing seemed enough. So instead, I leaned forward, letting my forehead rest against his. We stayed like that, silent, alive, and listening to the storm breathe around us. Near midnight, the rain began to fade. The sea calmed, the waves gentler now, as if tired of being angry. We opened the window to the scent of wet earth and salt. The air was cool, the kind that carries new beginnings. See, he said quietly. It passed. I smiled through the tears I hadn't noticed. This time, yes. He turned to me. And next time, then we face it together. He nodded, eyes soft. That's all I needed to hear. Outside, the last drops of rain slid from the roof, each one catching the candlelight before disappearing into the dark. Somewhere far beyond, thunder rolled once more. Distant, harmless, almost like applause. That night, we didn't speak again. There was no need to. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of everything we had been too afraid to say. I lay awake, listening to the sea. Its voice was different now. Calmer, forgiving, almost grateful. And I realized something simple, something I should have known all along. The storm hadn't come to destroy what we had. It had come to prove it could survive. When I opened my eyes, the world was bright again. The storm had passed. Light poured through the curtains in quiet, golden streams, touching everything like an apology. The house smelled of salt and morning. For a moment I lay still, listening. The ocean was singing, gentle waves brushing the shore, soft and rhythmic. as if whispering, "You made it." Jae-hyuk wasn't in the room. The pillow beside me was warm, the blanket folded neatly at the edge of the bed. One of his small, old habits that had somehow survived the lost year. I found him outside, standing barefoot on the porch, facing the sea. The wind tugged lightly at his hair. The sunlight traced the line of his shoulders. When he heard me, he turned and smiled. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied. "Couldn't sleep?" He shook his head. "Didn't want to. I wanted to see what the world looked like after the storm." And he looked back toward the horizon, where the waves shimmered like liquid glass. "It looks like it's forgiven us." I stepped beside him, feeling the damp wood under my feet. The sea stretched endlessly ahead, peaceful. The same place that had once taken him away, now returning him to me. We stood in silence for a long while. There was no rush, no fear, no ghosts left between us. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low, almost shy. "I used to think the sea hated me." I smiled faintly. "You weren't the only one." He glanced at me. "And now I think it was just waiting." He nodded, as if the thought settled something deep inside him. After breakfast, we walked down to the beach. The sand was cool, the sky wide and clear. Seashells glittered along the tide line. Tiny pieces of light scattered across the earth. Every step felt like walking through a memory, one that no longer hurt. When we reached the edge of the water, he stopped and crouched down, running his fingers through the foam. "The last thing I remember before everything went black," he said quietly, "was this sound. The waves." He nodded. "They were so loud. But underneath, I swear I heard someone calling my name." My throat tightened. "You did." He looked up at me. "Then maybe that's what pulled me back." A gull cried overhead, circling in the sky, its wings catching the light. The world felt vast again, but not empty. He took something from his pocket then. A small silver ring, slightly worn, sea-polished smooth. I froze. "You kept it." "It washed up on shore a week before I found you," he said. "I didn't even know what it was. I just couldn't throw it away." He slipped it gently onto my finger. "It belongs here," he said softly, "where it always was." Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. For once, they weren't from pain. The sea breeze carried his next words, almost like a vow. "I may forget faces, places, even time again someday, but I'll always find my way back to this sound. The sea, and you." I smiled through the tears. "Then I'll be here, listening." We stood together at the water's edge until the tide touched our feet. The sunlight glittered off the surface, warm and endless. When the wind shifted, I could swear the sea was singing again. Not the sad, morning tune it used to hum through my window, but something softer, freer. It sang of returns, of promises kept, of love that refused to drown. Jae-hyuk turned to me, eyes reflecting the same light that danced on the water. "Do Hae-won," he said, my name steady on his tongue. "Yes," he smiled. "Let's live quietly, this time." "Quietly," he nodded, just enough to hear the sea. And for the first time in a long time, I laughed. Not the broken laugh of someone trying to heal, but the real kind, light and full. The waves caught the sound and carried it away, and somewhere far beyond the horizon, the world finally felt whole again. That evening, I wrote one line in my journal, under the date that used to mark our wedding day. He came back with the tide, and maybe that's all the story ever needed to say. Hope you guys enjoy the story. Do like, share, and subscribe.